Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for the Minneapolis Ward 4 Candidate Forum, hosted by Make Homes Happen. We're so glad to have all of you here this afternoon. My name is Barb Janetta. I'm the Executive Director of Alliance Housing. We're an owner, developer, and manager of affordable housing in the city of Minneapolis. I am also a member, as is Alliance, of Make Homes Happen, and I volunteered to be the MC and moderator this afternoon. A few housekeeping items before we get started. We are using Zoom webinar, which means you can see and hear us, but we can't see and hear you. We are recording this webinar as we are with all of the candidate and the mayor forums, and we'll share it on the Make Homes Happen Facebook page by the end of the month so people can share it and take more time to listen through. Audience members, please use the question and answer feature, Q&A, at the bottom of your screen to type any questions you have for our candidates today. They'll be able to answer your questions in just a bit. Finally, candidates, I invite you at this time to share your website, contact page, or email address in the chat in case voters want to follow up with additional questions. As you all know, we have an important election coming up in the city of Minneapolis on November 2nd, less than 2 months away. All 13 Minneapolis City Council members, the Minneapolis mayor, are up for election this year, as are all the park board members and 2 board of estimate and taxation members. To see exactly who will be on your ballot, visit the Secretary of State's website on or after September 17th. For information about when, where, and how to vote, visit www.vote.minneapolismin.gov. And Julia Hobart, who's our managing tech person today, will share those links in the chat if you missed that. Additionally, Minneapolis has ranked choice voting elections. This November, you'll have the power to rank your first, second, and third choice candidates on your ballot. If your first choice does not continue in the instant runoff, your vote goes to your second choice. And if your second choice does not continue, your vote goes to your third choice. You should rank as many candidates as you prefer, up to 3. When you listen to the candidates tonight, consider not just your first choice, but also your second or third. Before we hear from the candidates, let me tell you a little bit about Make Homes Happen. We are a coalition of community-based groups and organizations that advocate for affordable housing development, preservation, and tenant rights in Minneapolis. In 2017, we successfully pushed for a $40 million investment in Minneapolis Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Yet even then, the housing needs of our city have far outweighed the dollars we've spent. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated what was already a housing crisis. And we know housing is a critical issue for our city. City leaders have significant influence on policies, programs, and funding choices that impact our community. That's why we're hosting these forums today and throughout the month. In order to ensure the fairness of our election series, Make Homes Happen used a uniform process in communicating with the candidates. We approached each candidate and invited them to participate in a Zoom interview about housing. The interview included 3 questions, and candidates had 2 minutes to respond to each question. We recorded their answers and will play them back for you now as opening statements for this event. Note that we did not edit their content or responses, but we did cut each answer off at 2 minutes. Anything that was said after 2 minutes will not be shared here today. This was done to ensure standardization across the interviews we conducted. Finally, candidates who did not participate, I think I can pass this, both of our candidates today did participate. So let's get ready to hear from the candidates. Julia will play the recorded Zoom interviews for us. We'll start with Philippe Cunningham in alphabetical order by last name.
Affordable housing has been a priority in the last 4 years, and many policies and programs were introduced to address the housing needs of the community, some of which have passed and some are currently under discussion. Do you believe that the city is headed in the right direction when it comes to affordable housing policies? Please explain your answer.
When it comes to housing affordability, both policy and investments, I do think that the city of Minneapolis is moving in the right direction, generally speaking. Wasn't even a full term ago that this conversation really hadn't made a lot of progress. So we've made tremendous progress recently, as a city council. However, as a North Minneapolis city council member, I do believe that we still have quite a ways to go. For example, with the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, that money is not coming to Ward 4. So something that is often touted as a big piece of evidence of progress, that actually is not investing in North Minneapolis and more than half of North Minneapolis. There are other policies that are really impactful, but we have to make sure that it is actually resulting in investments in North Minneapolis, in the fullness of North Minneapolis, even north of Lowry. And we have to make sure that the policies are mindful of the specific needs of North Minneapolis. That is what equity looks like, and we can't have progress without equity.
Are there any housing policies that you think the city is currently overlooking and should be discussed? Please be specific in what policies or tools you would want to make sure are brought to the table.
The city of Minneapolis overall, I feel, is really missing a housing first policy, with really thinking about how are we eliminating barriers entirely for folks to be able to access housing. I know that there are different pathways for that, but I do believe that a housing first policy will set a very clear expectation that we are aiming to end homelessness in the city of Minneapolis, and that we will put our investments in making that happen. By having a housing first policy, it will help us to be able to orient towards solution-based housing investments and policies. So thinking more strategically in how are we moving to that end goal. I think that that's a big missing piece, and I hope that we will be able to work together as a coalition and as a council member to be able for us to get the best policy in place that can help us reach our ultimate goal of ending homelessness and making sure that folks can be stably housed.
What are the practical skills and/or lived experience that you would bring to your role as a city council member that could be used to help address the city's affordable housing needs?
When I was elected in 2017, I was a renter still at that point, and I had been a renter my entire adulthood. And I, in my own lived experience, have lost housing due to being priced out. That is my own lived experience. I'm fortunate now to be able to own my home, but I am a first time home buyer, so I had to navigate that whole experience. And those different lived experiences that I've had to navigate really do anchor me in the real lived experience of my neighbors and of my constituents and of the residents of Minneapolis in a really unique way. Before I moved to Minneapolis, I lived in the San Francisco Bay Area. And when I lived there, I actually lived in a tool shed. That cost me almost $800 a month plus utilities to live in. Almost all of my earnings. I was a youth worker. I didn't have benefits. Almost all of my income was really going just towards that housing. And so having been in some fairly extreme housing situations, I understand the absolute urgency and realness that comes from having a lack of housing stability and a lack of access to affordable housing. And that is something that I'm bringing to the city council and to my analysis as a council member and a policymaker.
Thank you. Now we'll hear the recorded statements of LaTrisha Vetaw.
Affordable housing has been a priority in the last 4 years, and many policies and programs were introduced to address the housing needs of the community, some of which have passed and some are currently under discussion. Do you believe that the city is headed in the right direction when it comes to affordable housing policies? Please explain your answer.
Great question, Julia. I do believe the city is headed in the right direction, but I also come from the standpoint that there's still a lot of work to be done. Minneapolis has tripled the previous record investments in affordable housing and has invested more per capita than almost any city in the entire country, with the focus on deeply affordable and low-income housing. Yet there are still many families and individuals without housing across our city. Housing is a right, and no one should be left with the option of living on the street. I support all Minneapolis work towards expanding access to more housing types in all neighborhoods. Housing insecurity is a universal issue, and it is very important that we provide a diversity of housing options in every neighborhood. Over the past year and a half, Minneapolis has stepped up to support its people with emergency rental assistance, new homeless shelters, and harm reduction in the most severe circumstances. When I'm in office, I would like to see Minneapolis continue on this path, increasing support to those in need. The homelessness and affordable housing crisis is not one that Minneapolis can solve alone, but it is an area where I'm determined to lead.
Are there any housing policies that you think the city is currently overlooking and should be discussed? Please be specific in what policies or tools you would want to make sure are brought to the table.
So I think Minneapolis has promising building block policies that help address housing insecurity, but I also think there is so much more to do. This includes increasing the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, continuing the Stable Home, Stable Schools program, and our city's 4D program, and yes, opening up more shelters. There are still plenty of our neighbors who do not have stable housing, but Minneapolis has started the work. In office, I intend to continue it. One issue I do think gets overlooked sometimes is how housing policies in the suburb affect us in Minneapolis. We have to understand how these issues don't just stop at our border. That's why I'd like to see the city work to adopt a cooperative metro-wide approach to affordable housing and meeting the needs of those who are unsheltered. Otherwise, what ends up happening is we force those who can least afford to do so to move from place to place, searching for housing. This is disruptive to their lives, their children's schooling, their neighborhood relationships, and their ability to retain employment. It's just unfair if people want to stay with their communities in Minneapolis. They should be able to do so. We shouldn't be forcing folks to keep moving further and further out into the suburbs and taking on longer and longer commutes to work just so they can have a roof over their heads. Of course, the issue is complicated and it's going to take a collaborative effort among cities and counties around the metro to fix it. During my time at the Park Board, I developed strong relationships with just about everyone I worked with. That's why I believe I've got the experience necessary to bring together people from all around the metro and implement some innovative solutions for affordable housing.
What are the practical skills and/or lived experience that you would bring to your role as a city council member that could be used to help address the city's affordable housing needs?
Thank you. Another great question. As a city council member, I would bring a lot of personal housing insecurity experience to the table. Over 30 years ago, I moved to Minneapolis from affordable housing or housing projects on the south side of Chicago. Some of the things that I think they did right in Chicago were allow us an opportunity to have housing. My single mother probably wouldn't have been able to afford housing for my sister, brother, and myself. And also she wouldn't have been able to you know, be in a neighborhood where community was. A lot of people didn't leave the housing projects, and they built a strong sense of community there. But in the 80s, my mom decided to move to Minneapolis, and Section 8 and low income housing was a lifeline for us at that time. And it also allowed for us to live among people who didn't have the same income as we did, who were not necessarily low income. It allowed for us to live in a house, have a yard, have neighbors who were homeowners, learn different things about housing. So I think, and I've also been homeless. So I think my personal experience and my connection to a lot of the community members who live in the ward that I hope to serve is similar. You know, we've had a loss of housing. We've had to work hard to maintain the housing that we've had over the years. I'm fortunate enough that my husband and I are homeowners in Ward 4. Oh, that's got to be deleted in Ward 4. But that is, it was a long road. It was a long road here. It wasn't easy for us. It was a lot of hard work to get to where we need to be.
Thank you. And thank you to the candidates and audience members for being here this afternoon and introducing yourself through the video questionnaire. We're now ready to move on to the next part of the event, where we'll hear directly from the candidates in response to audience questions. If you're joining us today, please use the Q&A question and answer feature at the bottom of your screen. If you hover over it with your mouse, you'll see it there. To ask any housing related questions you have for our candidates. Make Homes Happen has prepared, the members of Make Homes Happen have prepared a few questions to get us started while we wait for the audience members. To be fair, we will alternate each candidate who answers first. Candidates, you'll each have 2 minutes to respond to the question. We'll time you and mute you at 2 minutes. You'll have to unmute yourself at the beginning of your conversation. We'll start with LaTrisha for our first question. The question is, describe one of the most effective measures that the city of Minneapolis could use to support and preserve our naturally occurring affordable housing in the market.
You said, okay, can you just repeat that for me one time? I'm sorry.
Absolutely. Describe one of the most effective measures that the city of Minneapolis could use to support and preserve naturally occurring affordable housing in our market.
Thank you. As I said in my video statement, you know, I believe that Minneapolis has done some good work so far. And one of those things is emergency rental assistance, you know, the ability for folks to have homeless shelters available to them, and also some of the resources they provide, that the city provides for home ownership, for new and first-time home buyers, also low-income housing and subsidized housing units being built in the city of Minneapolis. Those are all great opportunities for our city to continue to work. Thank you.
All right, sorry, I froze.
Yeah, and I was busy reading something. So I'll read the question once again and then
Okay, yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah. Describe one of the most effective measures that the city of Minneapolis could use to support and preserve naturally occurring affordable housing in the market.
Yes, thank you. So I think that it's first important to really name the fact that naturally occurring affordable housing is not actually naturally occurring. It really has been set up that way by zoning, which is why we have more naturally occurring affordable housing in some parts of the city than others. So again, wanting to make sure that we're really highlighting Ward 4 specific issues, our single family housing stock really provides an opportunity for folks to have starter homes, be able to get into home ownership. But those houses are not inherently affordable to folks who are is not naturally okay, I don't even know where I got lost. So our single family housing stock, it is a good opportunity to be able to enter into home ownership. However, it is not affordable to the folks who have lived in North Minneapolis for generations or their entire lives. And so what we have to do is we have to leverage both the vacant lots in our community, which I worked with many stakeholders, including many Make Homes Happen coalition members to create the Minneapolis Homes program, which actually 80% of the folks who go on to buy a home from the Minneapolis Homes program are BIPOC, first-time homeowners. And so, and then that also rehabs homes as well. What's going to be really important is how are we actually developing out more housing options. That's one of the issues that we have in Ward 4 is due to historical zoning. Single family homes are really the only option. So we have to think about how are we diversifying the housing types across the housing continuum and doing so incentivizing so that we can get better outcomes.
Everyone's so good at monitoring their own time. Thank you so much. So this second question, we'll start with Philippe. What will you do as council member to ensure the city has adequate funding and policies for production of new, affordable, and accessible housing stock?
This is, I believe, one of the most important aspects of increasing affordability of housing overall is increasing the amount of units that are available. It's basic supply and demand. So if we increase the supply, then that will be able to alter the cost due to demand. So I have continuously advocated for and voted in favor of increasing investment in the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. I will say, as I said in my opening statement questions, that the Affordable Housing Trust Fund money doesn't really make it to Ward 4. And that is because of prohibitory zoning that does not allow multifamily housing development to happen, which is why the 2040 plan was such an important component of undoing those sort of systematic barriers that have held our community back for so long. So it's important for us to actually think, though, more strategically long-term about creating a permanent funding stream that would go into an actual affordable housing trust fund. Right now is just that a trust in name and not actually in practice. And so I would like for us to, as a council, be able to work with the mayor to be able to designate a funding stream that permanent that would help us to increase the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So really what we're looking at is so incentivizing. We have to make sure that we're actually holding developers accountable for inclusionary zoning. And then we have to make sure that we have the right kind of zoning in the community to allow for building out more housing types and thus more units. Ward 4 has had the least amount of housing in the city, and that's not by accident.
LaTrisha, I'll reread the question. What will you do as council member to ensure the city has adequate funding and policies for the production of new, affordable, and accessible housing stock?
So first thing is continue to increase the funding in the trust fund for affordable housing. And another thing is we need to remember that we have to provide education to people of color in our city around, these resources. I've worked in North Minneapolis for over 20 years, and I find that a lot of times folks don't even know things are available. So I think it's important for us to continue to educate people of color in particular on the resources that the city has for them when it comes to financial resources for home ownership or rentals, or even if you have problems with your landlord, or if you need, there's lots of resources for seniors who still live in their homes. So education is key, I think, if we're continuing to provide funds. Also, we need to increase the supply of units that we have. In particular, in Ward 4, I've had many conversations with seniors who want to see apartments or condos with amenities in the ward. So the supply and the mixed use housing is very important also. We need to make sure that we have single family homes, that we have apartments with amenities, that we have rentals, that we have opportunities for home ownership as well. Thank you.
All right. Question 3, we'll start back with you, LaTrisha. Considering what you know about cost-burdened and vulnerable renters in Minneapolis, what will you do as a council member to improve the overall quality and accessibility of their housing options, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Again, this is about education for our community and also relationships, having relationships with builders, with landlords, with the community members. I think having an open door policy and communicating to all folks and understanding and really doing the work of the people of the ward is really important. Everyone's not going to own a home. We are going to have landlords in Ward 4. We are going to have renters. So we have to make sure that the renters are feeling good about their spaces that they're living in. And we also need to support some of, we have to support folks where they are. Every situation is not going to be the same. So we have to create policy and also processes that allow for that allow for homeowners to stay in their home, renters to rent, people to move in other places in the city if they want to. It's not just about Ward 4, as I said in my opening statements. It's also about the policies that are happening in the first tier suburbs around us and also other parts of the city in Minneapolis. Folks may start in Ward 4, but may want to move somewhere else. We have to allow for opportunities. Thank you.
All right, Philippe, I'll repeat the question. Considering what you know about cost-burdened and vulnerable renters in the city of Minneapolis, what will you do as a city council member to improve the overall quality and accessibility of their housing options?
We have to really think about it from a systematic approach. We can have the individual interventions and supports, but we have to be doing it in a very systematic kind of way. So something that I've been working on for a while is portfolio-based inspections. Havenbrook Homes or Front Yard, they own around 175 units, single family homes just in 55412, which is most of the ward, but not all of the ward. And so what we have seen that they have bought these houses. They charge very high rents for them, sometimes double what a mortgage would be if they actually owned the home. And they rent to people who are some of the most vulnerable renters. So folks have evictions or UDs on their records or have bad credit. So rather than having each issue individually, each unit being addressed, so chasing that, instead having a portfolio-based approach to inspections where we are looking at their entire portfolio and judging them based and holding them accountable based on their entire portfolio rather than chasing one unit at a time. Also, we need to, and this is something else that I've been working on, unfortunately, we've had some staffing capacity issues to be able to help with this policy, but I am also very committed to building out a licensing process for property management companies. Right now, there is no process, and a lot of times these out-of-state investment companies have
rental property companies actually doing the maintenance and they're not doing the maintenance. So there's no accountability. By having a licensing process that will actually give us some tools and mechanisms to actually hold them accountable. Thanks.
You're making my job easy. Thanks to both of you. So this next one, we'll start with Philippe. What is your position on the rent stabilization charter amendment that will be on this year's ballot, and your views on enacting a future rent stabilization policy within the city?
This is a big question, and I think it's not getting enough attention because other questions on the ballot are getting so much attention. I think that this is important. I would like for the people of Minneapolis, I'm glad that the people of Minneapolis will be able to vote on whether or not they would like for the city council to bring forward an ordinance for rent stabilization. I do support a rent stabilization ordinance. I think that we need to be intentional about building that out with as many stakeholders as possible, learning the lessons from other cities, basing it on the latest research. There's lots of work out there. We won't be building this from scratch. We have lots of experience, experts from across the country, and it is possible for us to be able to bring what typically would seem as to be opposing sides. For example, when I worked on the tenant relocation assistance ordinance, I was able to work with renter advocacy organizations and landlord advocacy organizations to come together, because ultimately we all shared an agreement that housing, affordable housing and providing high quality housing was something that we all agreed on, and that it was bad landlords who were actually denigrating the field overall. And so how do we actually find the landlords who are invested in providing high quality affordable housing, bringing them on board, and all of us working together? I really want to make sure that we're centering the most impacted, basing it on the latest research, and also putting an evaluation system in place so that we're continuing to evaluate based on different metrics of success and adapt and amend the ordinance as it is being rolled out, so that we are being nimble and smart in how we're governing.
All right, LaTrisha, I'll reread the question for you. What is your position on the rent stabilization charter amendment that will be on this year's ballot, and your views on enacting the future rent stabilization policy within the city?
So I do not support the amendment to allow the city of Minneapolis to craft and implement a rent control policy. I've heard from some elected officials and activists who support the ballot question that it is merely a first step to allow the council to explore rent control policies. I think that that's a deceitful way of framing the debate. The council can already research and propose those policies. They don't need to pass a ballot amendment to do it. The only reason they would want to pass this question is to actually implement a policy of rent control, which I cannot support. Anyone who's done research on rent control knows that it does not work. It's been tried in cities across the country, and the results have been clear. Rents stay artificially low for a lucky few, and they get jacked up for the rest of us, mostly people who look like me. That's not fair, and it's bad policy. We have lots of landlords in the Fourth Ward who are people of color and who want to make an honest living. I've heard from many of them that they sell their properties if this amendment passes. That's not fear mongering. It's the honest truth. And it happens. How are we, and if it happens, how are we helping renters? I support more investments in deeply affordable housing. I support strengthening the rights of tenants to live in a safe and affordable apartment. And there are many ways that we can increase affordable housing that have been studied and proven to be effective. Rent control is not one of them. And that's why I'll be voting against this ballot question. Thank you.
All right. LaTrisha, we'll start with you on this next question. Describe your direct experience establishing and maintaining varied and complex partnerships. How will you use this experience as a city council member?
Thank you. This is a really good question. So I have worked in North Minneapolis for over 20 years on public health policy. I started my work as an education and prevention campaign. And over the past 20 years, I've worked very hard to build a statewide and a local coalition of faith leaders, of young people. At times, my youth coalition has had over 200 members of young kids in North Minneapolis who I've worked with to teach them the importance of policy systems and environmental changes that they've advocated for on their behalf. Again, all Northside kids. Faith-based leaders throughout the state are a part of my menthol tobacco coalition, and that I co-lead. I also co-lead Minnesotans for a Smoke-Free Generation, a coalition that, you know, when you go in a bar or restaurant and you don't have to sit next to someone smoking or no one is smoking, that's a policy I worked on early in my career and worked with a large coalition of folks back then in 2006 that I've maintained. Most recently, that very same coalition has worked to increase the age to purchase tobacco to 21. So that skill of working with community that is on the same side or a different side of the policies that I'm advocating for, elected officials, whether at the state or local level or national level, is the work that I'm going to bring City Hall. But mostly the relationships that I've built in community. I mean, even before I started working on policy advocacy, just my natural instinct to build with community, especially around issues that are dear to us in this community, is the skill set that I plan to bring to City Hall.
And Philippe, I'll ask that question again for you. Describe your direct experience establishing and maintaining varied and complex partnerships. How will you use this experience as a city council member for Ward 4?
I have a lot of experience in building various coalitions and establishing relationships. I mean, I can go back to my time of being a union steward when I was a school teacher. But, you know, I really started to understand what governing looks like from inside governing and the importance of building inside-outside coalitions when I started working for previous Mayor Betsy Hodges. Through that work, I built relationships across the school district, across charter schools, across youth serving organizations, philanthropy, so that we could really move forward different policy and agenda items that really matter to the young people of Minneapolis and also improve their quality of life. So that was my first time seeing the importance of, like, you can't do anything by yourself in government. You have to be able to build partnerships with folks who are on the ground doing the work to be able to actually move forward policy in meaningful ways. Since being a city council member, that has been a critical component of my work. And it's across a lot of policy areas. It's a different group of stakeholders when it is public safety. It's a different group of stakeholders when it's housing, environmental justice, across the board. There are folks who maybe don't like the stances that I take or my particular positions on things that I still regularly talk to and engage with in order to be able to get their feedback, to be able to find common ground with where there is some, and be able to really build power together in meaningful ways. We have to be able to find that nuance, even though politics are so polarized right now. We're at the local level. We have to be able to actually have meaningful relationships and coalitions if we're going to be able to govern well together. Thanks.
Philippe, we'll start this next question with you. As a city council member, what would you do to preserve and expand homeownership options for households of color and first-time home buyers?
Oh, this is my jam. I've spent quite a lot of time focusing on that because that was something that I heard a lot in 2017 when I was campaigning, was a lot of BIPOC Ward 4 residents who wanted to be able to be homeowners. And I actually had that experience myself. And so having worked with, again, I mentioned this before, working with several stakeholders, I created the Minneapolis Homes Program as it currently exists today, which is that it's leveraging the vacant lots as wealth building opportunities for particularly BIPOC first-time homeowners. There's really a zeroing in of how are we building homeownership opportunities, sustainable homeownership opportunities for first-time and first-generation homeowners. So as I mentioned, 80% of the folks who have utilized that program are BIPOC first-time homeowners. So what we're doing is working. When I first got into office, that program, it didn't really have a clear theory of change. The theory of change was these vacant lots are bad, get rid of them as fast as possible. What I did is I worked with city staff and community stakeholders to shift that theory of change to how are we leveraging this public land as an opportunity to build wealth for BIPOC families. And that is what we're being able to deliver now. I think that in terms of preserving, I think an issue that we don't talk enough about when it comes to affordable homeownership is taxes, property taxes and assessments. That is something that I have been trying to work on. That is incredibly complex and not an easy fix, but really trying to figure out how do we have more equitable assessments. I know a lot of cash poor homeowners that can't afford that extra $100 per month for the assessment on a road reconstruction by their house. So we have to think about that too.
LaTrisha, as city council member, what would you do to preserve and expand home ownership for households of color and first-time home buyers?
Thank you. So this is connected to the previous question a lot because this is an opportunity for partnership. This is, you know, for me as a council member, I would love to work with the county and surrounding suburbs as well on this type of policy. We need to have inventory, one, for people of color to purchase homes in our ward in particular. Also, we have to allow for those steps that you need to take before you can even purchase a home. So we need to work with folks on credit repair, how important it is to, you know, have funds to fix things that may come up, you know, the money that you need to put down to purchase a home. How do we work with folks on getting that? And, you know, a lot of times we don't talk about, you know, the down payment is one of the things that people don't have. That may be why they can't step into home ownership. So how do we come together as agencies, as partners, and figure out what that looks like for people of color as a means to purchase a home? Again, we need to have inventory. That's the biggest thing. Homes are selling fast. People are not building homes fast enough for the amount of people, and people of color have to have a loan ready and bid. You know, there can be homes available, but if they got outbidded, they're not going to get that home. So inventory is key in this situation. We have to make sure we have inventory and folks have the financial resources and educational tools to purchase and maintain home ownership. Thank you.
Sorry, switching around here. LaTrisha, we're going to start with you on this one. I received a question about homelessness. As city council member, what specific steps would you take to address homelessness in our city and ensure unsheltered residents have access to safe and stable housing?
Thank you. You know, I got a crash course in homelessness last year when a lot of encampments went up in our city and in our parks. And as the vice president of the park board, I witnessed it firsthand, what was going on. Homelessness was a much bigger issue in the city than I thought it was. When you walk out into those parks, you saw so many people there that, wouldn't have been in your sight at that time. And it was a good opportunity for me to work with, city elected officials and the county and state officials, because we also worked with the governor's office on resources for acquiring shelter for our homeless population. I know a lot of folks thought that the parks were good, but I don't think living in a park is a dignified space. So we have to allow for, folks to have housing. Housing is a right, is a basic need. As city government, as county government, we need to be focused on, action so that folks have somewhere to live. I was able to visit the tiny home village. We need more tiny homes, we need more options for folks around housing, whether that's acquiring more homeless shelters for folks to live in, building more tiny homes, just creating infrastructure as a whole in our city to really address the homelessness issue.
All right, Philippe, I'll repeat the question. As city council member, what specific steps would you take to address homelessness in our city and ensure unsheltered residents have access to safe and stable housing?
There are so many barriers that we see when it comes to housing, whether it is people's credit, their access to jobs, whether that is substance abuse issues or mental health issues. There's lots of barriers that cause folks to end up to be unhoused. And so one of the ways that we really can be more intentional, as I mentioned in the opening statement, is I believe that the city of Minneapolis should pass a housing first policy, and not just in name, but to actually say strategically, this is how we are going to move towards ending homelessness in Minneapolis. That looks like investing more in that and expanding the housing continuum. So that looks like wet housing, wet shelters, so that folks who are actively using have somewhere safe and healthy to be able to be. We have to think about also, sometimes folks don't think about this. I have lots of pets, but we have to be able to have pet-friendly shelters and pet-friendly housing, because some folks have to choose between their pets, which are family, or their housing sometimes. We have to think about different types of housing. LaTrisha spoke to tiny homes. So really, how are we thinking about the different types of housing in the continuum? Partnerships are really key. It has this responsibility has really started to fall more and more on the city to start to fill the gaps around homelessness. Increasing the amount of shelters is helpful. We absolutely need more emergency shelters, but we have to also recognize that that is not the solution. There are many people who choose to not go into shelters for a multitude of reasons, whether it's unsafe, it is not accommodating in some way. So we really have to be thinking broadly about what steps do we need to take, how do we get there, and are we backing it up with the right kinds of investments?
All right, Philippe, we'll start this next question with you. What is your position on maintaining a dedicated source of annual funding to produce and preserve affordable and accessible housing for residents of the city?
Yes, I actually spoke to this a little bit earlier when talking about expanding the housing supply. I do support us having a dedicated revenue stream, so funding source for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, as well as other housing strategies. We look to other cities that have housing levies, and it's like sometimes I look with hearts in my eyes because it invests in multitude of layers of strategies. So whether it is, affordable home ownership, increasing the amount of community land trust, increasing the supply of housing overall, really zeroing in on the most vulnerable renter protections, looking at how it does those other cities have those resources, I definitely feel quite envious and would like to see something similar in Minneapolis. So I would be absolutely 100% down to work with the mayor and my council colleagues in order to identify and designate a permanent funding source for housing.
LaTrisha, I'll repeat the question. What's your position on maintaining a dedicated source of annual funding to produce and preserve affordable and accessible housing for residents of the city?
So I am completely dedicated to maintaining funds. As a Parks Commissioner, I've advocated to dedicate funds for our tree levy. And, you know, the tree levy is a big deal. And I see dedicated funds for housing as an even bigger deal. You know, if we continue to talk about access for people of color and, you know, those of us who are most vulnerable in our communities, dedicated funds is one of the ways that we can tackle that. So I am 100% in support of dedicated funds. Thank you.
I want to remind and invite audience members, please send in more questions. If you have them, we're happy to use your questions for this forum here today. LaTrisha, I'll start with you on this next question. Do you think the city can improve upon its oversight of rental housing through regulatory services? If so, why and how? If not, why not?
Absolutely. I think that the city can improve through regulatory services. That's what it's there for. That may be an opportunity for us to create new policies. And this may be a department that we need to have more hires in, so that regulatory services has the ability to go out more often to properties and make sure that people are doing what they need to do, so that you know, that folks are being held accountable for their properties. So yes, I do think that there's something that there's something there with regulatory services. We can enhance that department through policy, through workforce, and through partnerships. Thank you.
Philippe, do you think the city can improve upon its oversight and of rental housing through regulatory services? If so, why and how? If not, why not? I think we lost him for a moment.
I'm having some issues too. You said you could see me.
Yeah,
fine,
you said that. So far I've been, when you've talked, we could
there
see.
he is.
Philippe, so sorry, I'll repeat the question.
Sorry, everybody.
No, it sounds like a few of us are getting unstable internet session, but so far, all of the questions you've been responding to, we can see and hear you just fine. So we'll try to monitor that. Do you think the city can improve upon its oversight of rental housing through regulatory services? If so, why and how? If not, why not?
I really appreciate this question because it's something that I've spent a lot of time working on. We as the city have quite a lot of power when it comes to rental properties because of the rental licensing process. The issue that we run into specifically in Ward 4 is that really our inspections process was not set up for single family homes. And so it's been really, and it's since the 2008 foreclosure crisis, where we had these big investment companies coming in, snatching up large swaths of our single family homes. We've really had to adjust to this new reality. So I've been really pushing for that, particularly since I got into office in 2018. So I'll just say we have really amazing staff in regulatory services. Sometimes it can be so easy to say the city, but I want to just name that we have amazing, hardworking, dedicated public servants in our regulatory services department who want to do right by renters, and I'm very grateful to be able to work alongside them. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a huge advocate of portfolio-based inspections. That's particularly relevant for us in Ward 4 because we have so many so many properties under a few landlords and investment companies. So by doing that, there is greater accountability by looking at the entire portfolio rather than individual properties. And then as well as, again, I mentioned the the property management company licensing process. We're really missing that right now. That's how a lot of these negligent landlords and investment companies get to sidestep responsibility, is that they have a rental company doing the maintenance. And so they can say they're not doing it rather than them. And so this is a way, I'll just say very quickly, we need to hold them accountable, and we have the tools to do it. We just have to really dig in. Thanks.
I'm going to wait a minute for LaTrisha to come back on. She's having some difficulties with her internet connection, as apparently we all are today. It never fails. We actually we have a question from the audience. I'm going to give her one more couple of seconds to get reconnected, and then we'll toss up and start with you on this one, Philippe, so that we don't waste a lot of time. Thanks, audience members, for the question. We're welcome and invite you to submit them, and we'll insert them as time is available. I'm going to go ahead and have you start on this one, Philippe. The question that came from the audience says, what specific steps can the city or you as a council member take to increase the supply of multifamily ownership options? The question says, we can fit more townhouses or condos on vacant land than detached houses. What are the barriers to these being constructed?
Great question. So actually, I tail off over the last couple of years actually in partnership or in alignment with the 2040 plan to actually increase or adapt the policy governing the Minneapolis Homes program to actually allow up to, I believe, 20 units, and it has to be at least one owner occupied. And so it's actually an income generating opportunity. It's a wealth building opportunity. And so I'm very excited about that. And I actually, not that long ago, pulled city staff into my office, and I was like, no more single family homes on the lots. We've done really great work on that. How are we getting more multifamily housing units on these vacant lots? And so they came back recently with like 12 housing development projects, and 2 of them were duplexes, and they were so excited to tell me about it. Which I was like, great, but I would love to see at least half of these being more than just 2 units. And so where the challenge is that it's very expensive to build the housing. There are lots of barriers. Even though the 2040 plan passed, that doesn't like magically poof, all of the zoning has changed. And so there's a lot of zoning barriers that get in the way of that. So I would say that between the cost of actually developing multifamily housing, even if it's like a triplex, that is astronomically expensive for the types of rent that is realistic in Ward 4. And so cost of development as well as zoning has really caused a lot of barriers, but I believe in it very much so.
Welcome back, LaTrisha. I went ahead and let Philippe start with that question, so I'll reread it now.
I'm so sorry. I've moved.
You can't help it.
I'm so sorry.
It's the environment. Yeah, no worries. I'm just glad you're back.
Thank you.
What specific steps can the city or you as a council member take to increase this? This question came from an audience member, by the way. What specific steps can the city or you as a council member take to increase the supply of multifamily ownership options? The question person says, we can fit more townhouses or condos on vacant lots than detached houses. What are the barriers to these being constructed?
So the first barrier that comes to mind is we have to have folks who want to build those type of properties. You know, in my experience, I've talked to people who are interested in building either single family homes or these larger units where they get more of a bang for their buck with the larger units. And then with the single family homes, you know, in particular in Ward 4, it's a high demand for single family homes. We have some larger size families here. So I think the biggest barrier is, you know, like having someone interested in building that as a part of their investment. And then also the second would be now materials and everything just cost so much after COVID. You know, I don't know if builders have the funds there to go in that direction. I mean, building as a whole is slowing down because of the price of materials, development as a whole. Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to our next question. What's your, Philippe will start on this one. Actually, no, I'm sorry. LaTrisha will start on this one, sorry. What is your position on a tenant opportunity to purchase policy, TOPA, for Minneapolis? Based on your position, what impact do you think it will have on residents who live in rental properties?
So I think that, you know, if tenants have an opportunity to purchase their home, they should be able to. And again, it goes back to, you know, like what resources can we provide for them during the time of renters to purchase those properties? You know, if the landlord is willing to sell or wants to sell, I would hope that the tenant who is living there can purchase first so that we don't have kids moving and going to new schools, or a family, or even if it's single folks, you know, looking for a new route to work and moving out of our community and looking for somewhere else. So I definitely support opportunities for folks to purchase their homes if they're available for purchase. If they can talk their landlord into selling to them, that would be awesome. What I know as a child growing up, when we moved to Minneapolis and had you know, even though it was Section 8, it was stable. We had schools, we had friends. We built this sense of community in this neighborhood because we were able, you know, to live there, to remain there for some time. And then when my mom purchased the home, you know, that was our community as well. And so I love any opportunity we have to build up families and people in our communities in that way.
Thanks again to the candidates for being so succinct with your questions. You make my job easy. I want to remind audience members, once again, we invite your questions on housing for our candidates here today. And Philippe, I'll read this question again and give you a chance to respond. What is your position on a tenant opportunity to purchase policy, TOPA, for Minneapolis? Based on your position, what impact do you think it will have on residents who live in rental properties?
I strongly support us bringing forward a tenant opportunity to purchase ordinance here in Minneapolis. I think it's a really critical component for the ecosystem that I'm trying to help create in Ward 4 around rentals. The first step was really, well, one part is we have to improve inspections, and we have to be able to actually hold landlords accountable through the tenant relocation assistance ordinance that I wrote and led. I wrote in partnership with many organizations that are part of Make Homes Happen, as well as the multi-housing association. We were able to put the kinds of protection in place so that if and when we hold landlords accountable and revoke their rental license, that they are then responsible for protecting the relocation needs of those tenants. So they are held accountable for that. Now, what happens then is that there's an opportunity because then because that person might put up the house for sale, being able to figure out ways to build out an ecosystem in which we have predatory landlords who no longer are incentivized to extract wealth from vulnerable renters. Instead, selling the homes because they're being held accountable and it's not easy money. And then being able to actually transition folks into home ownership. So in addition to a tenant opportunity to purchase, we also have to make sure that we are building up folks' ability to rapidly respond, have good credit, have access to down payments, and so on and so forth. So, but yes, I strongly support that.
An audience member asked a follow-up question to that same topic of TOPA, tenant opportunity to purchase. And I'll start with you on this one, Philippe. What specific tools would you work on to make TOPA a success? The option to purchase is great, but it won't work for a lot of folks if they don't have the resources to purchase.
That's exactly right. And kind of getting to the part of where I was starting to speak to, so I'm glad I have a few more minutes to talk about it. So I think that what's really important is that we have to couple the tenant opportunity to purchase alongside resources that would actually help the tenants to be able to take advantage of that opportunity to purchase. So that looks like down payment assistance. That looks like working with organizations. We already do this we work with Build Wealth Minnesota, for example, or the African Development Center and other organizations, the Lao Assistance Center, to actually work directly with BIPOC community members to be able to fix their credit, be able to budget so that they understand how to take care of a mortgage and property taxes and prepare them to actually be homeowners. So the tenant opportunity to purchase, we have to be mindful of the amount of time between when the landlord decides to sell the property until that time frame closes, so that there is enough time for renters to be prepared if they are interested in purchasing that property. But we have to make sure that we're expanding the available resources that we have. So a lot of the Minnesota Homeownership Center, we invest a lot of money there as the city. So really, how are we expanding those opportunities and also creating differentiated products so that we're meeting the needs of the tenants who would be able to take advantage of this opportunity. I know that in my case, I really wanted to buy the single family home that my husband and I were living in as renters, but we were not prepared and able to do so in the rapid period of time. And so this would just be able to put those resources in place.
Excuse me, LaTrisha, this is a follow-up question to the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. That came from the audience. What specific tools would you work on to make TOPA a success? The option to purchase is great, but it won't work for a lot of folks if they don't have the resources to purchase.
Thank you. Again, this is a great opportunity for partnerships. This is something that should be happening with renters, even if they're not interested in purchasing at the time. Like, we should be providing education to folks about what home ownership looks like. This is a great place for us to partner with the county for financial resources. A big barrier to home ownership is financial resources. And so again, these are things we should be providing to renters the entire time, not necessarily just when they say, I want to purchase a home. A lot of times when people say, I'm ready to purchase a home, it may be because they have to leave somewhere they're leaving. They're living. So I see, a future where folks are learning about home ownership and resources that we have at the city and county level while they are renters, in case one day they just want to make that leap into home ownership. Home ownership is a big deal. It comes with a lot of expenses that you may not have as a renter. Some renters do incur expenses that homeowners do, but there's a lot more with home ownership around maintenance, around taxes that can change every year. Those things we have to prepare people for when they're renters. And even if you're a homeowner and you need to upsize or downsize, that happens too. Folks buy a starter home and then you have to buy a bigger home because you have a growing family. And so I think there's always opportunity for education. And as a city, we should be providing that education. Thank you.
Thank you. We're moving towards the end of our time here. So we're going to ask one last question to both candidates. And if you'd like to put some closing comments in your 2 minutes, that would be just fine. And we're going to give LaTrisha the first up on this one. What steps will you take to cultivate constructive and effective working relationships with city staff, other council members, and/or the mayor?
Thank you. Again, relationships is my jam. I jokingly say that I'm a middle child, and so I didn't have a choice in building relationships. I had to in order to get things done in my household. As a 15-year employee of North Point Health and Wellness Center, the success of my work has always been around relationships. As a parks commissioner, even when I don't get along with some of my colleagues, I think for the most part, we all have an interest in making sure that our youth have access in our city and that, our goals are same, but sometimes the way we get there are different. So I'm always open to building relationships, even if we're coming to the matter on at different ways. I'm open to others' ideas. I never close the door on someone, even when they don't agree with my vision or my version of how things should happen. And then I'll just end with, everyone deserves to live in a home that is safe, secure, comfortable, and affordable. And I really mean a home, not just a place to rest their head at night. And my commitment is to that. I've had to deal with homelessness, projects, low income housing. I'm a homeowner, and I want people to move through home ownership if they want to. I want people to be renters if they want to. Overall, I want people to feel safe and welcome in whatever place they call home. Thank you.
Oh, I forgot to mute myself. All right, Philippe, I'll read the question, this last question for you. What steps will you take to cultivate constructive and effective working relationships with city staff and other city council members and/or the mayor?
One of the true pleasures actually of being a city council member is being able to work with city staff, which is why I took a moment to humanize the city as many city staff who are passionate, committed public servants. And so I have a really great working relationship because based on taking feedback, I've been more personally heavily involved in constituent services. So fortunately, the good relationships help to be able to facilitate those needs getting met. And so good relationships there. I have actually collaborated with every single one of my colleagues on at least one major piece of legislation, budget amendment, or a systems change. So I have, including the mayor. The mayor and I sometimes, we butt heads, and that's okay because that's how democracy works, but we still work together. And so that is a part of governing, is being able to understand you can be in relationship with someone and also still hold them accountable, and do so in ways that are healthy for our democracy. And so that is what I've tried to model with my relationships. And, I'll just close with saying that Ward 4 has had the lowest amount of housing units developed over the last 20 years, and that is by design. I have worked relentlessly in order to do that, to change that. I don't want us to be at the very bottom of all the wards anymore. We have major projects that are in the works, and these projects take time. And so we'll start to see the developments happening over the next couple of years, and I'm really excited to see that. And I'll just throw out there, we have on the docket 520 units at Upper Harbor Terminal that will be affordable at North Minneapolis affordability levels. That was something that was important to everybody at the table. So this is a big issue, and I want to make sure that we see it through. Thanks.
Thank you both. for participating in our event today. We covered a lot of territory. It's important that voters hear directly from you about issues that matter, and we're extremely grateful for your time and willingness to talk about affordable housing in the city of Minneapolis. To all those who attended this event, thanks so much for joining this afternoon. If you have other questions related to affordable housing, you can contact candidates through the information they shared this evening about how to best contact them. Be sure to follow Make Homes Happen on Facebook, as we will share a recording of this forum on our page. Julia is going to share a link to our Facebook page in the chat. Thanks so much again, everyone. Have a good afternoon and a good rest of the weekend.